Muslims around the world are suffering. From China to Kashmir to Syria and Lebanon, and in many other countries.
Even in America, Muslim students struggle to find good schools that are strong in the Islamic knowledge. Help the Association of Islamic Charitable Projects support and strengthen our Muslim communities. Donate generously this Ramadan for the benefit of your Muslim brothers and sisters. Visit gofundme.com/AICP fund.
بالخير هيا بنا نلقاه في يومنا يا سادتي يا كرام سيروا لنيل المنى بالخير هيا بنا نلقاه في يومنا يا سادتي يا كرام سيروا لنيل المنى سيروا لنيل المنى.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين. We start with the name of Allah. We praise and thank Allah the Exalted for all of the givings He gave without that being an obligation. And we ask Allah to raise the rank of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the ranks of his wives, believing relatives and companions, and the ranks of those who follow them sincerely until Judgment Day. And we ask Allah to protect Muhammad's nation from what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam feared for it. Thereafter, we correct our intentions, seeking reward from Allah the Exalted only. In the previous session, we talked about the conditions for the Friday prayer. We talked about the communal obligation of the 5 daily prayers that the person who is الجماعة على الذكور الأحرار المقيمين البالغين غير معذورين فرض كفاية, that it is a communal obligation for the 5 daily prayers to be prayed in congregation, and that this communal obligation is directed towards the male, free, pubescent, unexcused resident. All right, the person who fulfills these or fits this description. And that a communal obligation means that if it is performed in a way that is considered sufficient, now some people, enough that the religion deem sufficient, perform the deed, then those who did not perform the deed would not be sinful. Those others who this deed is also directed towards would not be sinful, and that is because it is being performed in a way that is considered sufficient religiously. So the 5 daily prayers in congregation is a communal obligation. It must be established by some of the Muslims in an apparent way. We mentioned that if the town was a small town, then they need to be performed at least in one location. And if it was a large town, then it would be in multiple locations. From there, we will continue from what the author mentioned about matters pertaining to the Friday prayer. He said, in the Friday prayer, to pray in congregation is a personal obligation. So first he mentioned the congregational prayers, the 5 daily prayers in congregation. Now he's mentioning, as for the Friday prayer, it is a personal obligation. So it's not sufficient for just some people to perform it among those who this obligation is directed towards, and the others who are also included in that group, they just skip it because it's done by some people. No, every individual towards whom this obligation is directed must perform it themselves. So he said, and in the Friday prayer, to pray in congregation is a personal obligation upon the free, pubescent, and unexcused male inhabitants, if they were 40 in number and living in buildings, not in tents. The Friday prayer is also obligatory upon the men who intend to stay in the town of Jumu'ah, the town in which the Friday prayer is being performed, for 4 whole days, excluding the day of entry and the day of exit. And it's also obligatory to be performed by those who reside outside of the boundaries of the town. However, they can hear the resounding call of a person who is standing at the edge of that town closest to them. That is, they can hear the adhan of the person who called the adhan at the closest edge of the town to their encampment, to where they reside. That is, they would be able to have the adhan been called at the closest edge. In explaining this, the Sheikh mentioned the congregational performance of the Friday prayer is a personal obligation. Thus, it is not permissible to be prayed individually. Those people who we just mentioned, who are obligated to pray the Friday prayer, they have to pray it in congregation. They can't pray it alone. Its obligation is upon whomever was attributed with the aforementioned descriptions. Freedom, so it's not obligatory on the slave. Residence, meaning the person is not in the state of a traveler. Sanity, because he's not, meaning he's not insane, because the insane person is not accountable. Pubescence, although the prepubescent child who completed 7 lunar years of age and was mentally discriminate, and even though he didn't reach pubescence yet, still the guardian would order him to pray the congregational prayers and the Friday prayer. He said, and lack of an excuse. So the person who has a religiously valid excuse, he's not obligated to pray the Friday prayer in congregation. Everything that is considered an excuse for abandoning congregational prayer is an excuse for abandoning the Friday prayer. Among the excuses for abandoning them are rain, snow, and hail if they soaked the garment. Also, illness, that is a hardship. If a person had an illness that was considered a hardship for them to attend the prayer with it, then this is also an excuse. He said, also among the excuses for abandoning these prayers in congregation, not abandoning the prayer, the person still has to pray as long as they're conscious. But they wouldn't have to pray these prayers in congregation, is nursing the sick one who has no one to check on them. As for merely visiting the sick, this is not an excuse. Right? Just if a person wants to visit someone sick while that person has those who check in on them, then this would not be an excuse for skipping praying the Jumu'ah prayer or the 5 daily prayers in congregation. He said, also being involved in selling the likes of medicine for the ill, even if there was one to check on them. If one was selling the needed medicine for the ill person, then this would also be an excuse for that person to skip praying the 5 prayers in congregation or the Jumu'ah prayer in congregation. He said, also, whoever had a close acquaintance, whether it was one's wife or one's in-laws, yani his relatives through his spouse, or a slave that he owned, or a friend of his, or a teacher of his, or even an emancipated slave, if one of these acquaintances of his was close to death, then this is also an excuse for one to skip praying the 5 daily prayers and the Jumu'ah prayer in congregation. He said, And these are, we'll mention those and stop. These are among the examples of excuses that would permit a person to skip praying the 5 obligatory prayers in congregation or the Friday prayer. He said the Friday prayer is only obligatory upon them if they were 40 in number. Male inhabitants, not like a person who lives in an area residing there, but that's not his hometown. Rather, he may be staying there for a short or a long while, but he doesn't intend to stay there. The person's hometown is a town that they don't leave in the summer or the winter except with the intention to return there. So if a person was away for college, for example, so he's living in this town for months at a time or even years, but it's not their hometown. They always intend to go back to where they were born, for example, or their previous town that they were in, and not stay in their college town. Then they would not be considered an inhabitant. So if the number of inhabitants who fulfilled these other descriptions was less than 40, then the people of that town would not pray the Jumu'ah prayer. Rather, they would pray Dhuhr. This number of 40 is according to the saying we learn in the Shafi'i school. Some scholars, they have a number that's less than that would suffice for a group of people to establish praying the Jumu'ah Friday prayer in congregation. So he said, the Friday prayer is only obligatory upon them if they were 40 in number, male inhabitants residing in buildings, counted among the structures of the town, if they were of wood, cane, or branches. Yani, the people have to be dwelling in buildings, these types of structures, but it doesn't have to be of brick, it doesn't have to be of plywood, it doesn't have to be of stone, it doesn't have to be of steel and glass. Rather, even if these homes were of wood or of cane, like you have bamboo, for example, that's the type of cane, or other than that, or made from branches. You find that, for example, some places they have roofs made of branches. Then these would still be considered structures because they're not tents. They're not tents. He said, the Friday prayer is not obligatory upon tent dwellers. So if the people were tent dwellers, then they would not be obligated to pray the Jumu'ah prayer. Like those Bedouins who are like the desert Arabs who are they live a nomadic lifestyle, going from place to place and setting up tents there. He said the Jumu'ah prayer is obligatory upon whoever intends residing in the town of Jumu'ah 4 full days or more, other than the day of entry and exit, because with that, travel is interrupted. Once one intends to stay in a town for 4 full days, not including the day of entry, not including the day of exit, then they would no longer be a traveler, they would be at the very least a resident. If they now plan for this to be their hometown, then they would be considered an inhabitant, a mustawtin. Otherwise, they would be a resident, a muqim. He said, the Friday prayer is also obligatory upon whoever inhabits a place in which he hears the call to prayer, that is, the call to prayer of a person with a loud voice, standing at the nearest edge of the town, that is, the town in which the Jumu'ah prayer is being prayed, the nearest edge to their settlement. So if some people were settled outside of the town in which Jumu'ah is being prayed, but they were close enough that if a person with a very loud voice called the adhan, made the call to prayer at the closest edge of the town in which Jumu'ah is being performed, the closest edge to their settlement, that they would hear the adhan, then those people who live in that settlement outside of the town would be obligated to go to that town and perform Jumu'ah with the people of that town. He said, this is considering still winds. So if If it was very windy, like, a storm or the like, and you couldn't hear someone calling the adhan because of the wind, this is not considered. Rather, the consideration is the still winds. He said, and his moderate hearing. So if a person was deaf or nearly deaf, for example, thus they couldn't hear the adhan being called, but it's because of their deafness. Whereas if they had moderate hearing, they could hear the adhan being called. Then that weakness in their hearing does not exclude them from the obligation of attending the town of Jumu'ah and praying Jumu'ah with them. Likewise, if a person had very strong hearing, like their sense of hearing was extremely sharp, so they could hear the adhan being called much further away than a person of moderate hearing. In this case, if they could hear the adhan being called, but if they only had moderate hearing, they couldn't, then they would not be obligated to attend the town of Jumu'ah and pray the Friday prayer with them. He said, and this is that he would hear the adhan, hear the call to prayer, in a way that he knows what he hears is the call to the Friday prayer, even if he is unable to discern its words. A person might hear the call to prayer from a distance. He recognizes it, that it's the call to prayer. So then this person, considering still winds and moderate hearing, if he lived outside of the town of Jumu'ah, he could hear it and recognize that it is the call to prayer. He would be obligated to attend the town of Jumu'ah and pray the Jumu'ah prayer with them, even if he couldn't make out every word, discerning each and every word of the adhan itself. With that, the Sheikh, he finished his introduction pertaining to praying the 5 daily prayers in congregation and the Jumu'ah prayer in congregation. And then he moves on from that, talking about the conditions for the Friday prayer, the integrals of the speeches, these other matters. The first thing he mentioned are the conditions for the Friday prayer, which are the setting in of the Dhuhr time. That's the first of them. We mentioned before that the condition is not a part of the deed, but the deed is not valid without. So thus, the Friday prayer would not be valid if any of these conditions was not met. The first of these that the Sheikh mentioned is the setting in of the Dhuhr time. So one does not pray the Jumu'ah prayer before the declination of the sun, for example. He said, the aforementioned 40 inhabitants must hear the 2 speeches during the Dhuhr time. They would hear the 2 speeches during the Dhuhr time and before praying the Jumu'ah prayer. So they have to hear the 2 speeches. They hear that in the Dhuhr time, and it's before they actually pray the prayer. The third is that the Jumu'ah prayer must be performed in congregation by the aforementioned 40 inhabitants. It doesn't mean just them, but at least them. And at least 40 individuals that fit those descriptions. He said, and another Jumu'ah prayer must not be performed simultaneously, that is at the very same time, with it, or preceding it, that is performed before it, in the same town. If the opening Allahu Akbar of one prayer preceded that of another, the former would be valid and the latter would be invalid. That is, if you had 2 Jumu'ah prayers being performed in one town, and the takbirah, the opening saying of Allahu Akbar, of one of these 2 prayers came first, it preceded the opening saying of Allahu Akbar of the other, then the earlier one, the one whose takbirah was completed first, would be valid, and the latter would be invalid. He said this is true if it was a hardship for them to meet in one place. However, If it was hard for No, this is true if it was not a hardship for them to meet in one place. And if it was not a hardship for all the people of the town to meet in one place, then it's not permissible to have more than one Jumu'ah prayer in a town. However, if it was hard for them to all congregate in one location, then it is permissible to have more than one Jumu'ah prayer, only as many as are needed to fulfill the need. And then in this case, if there were two Jumu'ah prayers, for example, then if one preceded the other, both would still be valid, the former and the latter. The Sheikh explained this, saying that a condition for the validity of the Friday prayer is that it would occur during the Dhuhr time. Thus, it is not made up as Jumu'ah. Rather, it is made up if the time of Dhuhr escaped one as a Dhuhr. So if a person did not get to the Friday prayer, they missed it. Then, if they want to make it up, they don't pray Jumu'ah, they pray Dhuhr. They don't pray 2 rak'ah, 2 cycles of the prayer intending to pray the Jumu'ah prayer. Rather, they pray 4 cycles intending to pray the Dhuhr prayer. The Friday prayer is reached by praying at least 1 cycle with the Imam. If the follower got to the prayer late, he missed the speeches without going into missing the speeches, if he got to the prayer late, the Imam had already started praying and the follower joined, then if the follower joins the prayer in a way where he makes the bowing with the Imam in the 2nd rak'ah, then this is enough for it to be considered that he reached 1 rak'ah with the Imam. So then in this case, the follower, after the Imam says the salam, then had the follower missed the 1st rak'ah, then he would get up and pray 1 more rak'ah of the prayer, 2 altogether. He said, however, if the follower did not reach the Imam except after the bowing of the 2nd rak'ah, that is in the Friday prayer, in this case, he intends the Friday prayer, however, he prays 4 rak'ah. He prays it like he would pray Dhuhr. He makes the intention to pray Jumu'ah, to pray the obligatory Friday prayer, but he prays in fact 4 rak'ah of the prayer. So if, for example, the follower, he was delayed, he didn't get to the prayer at the beginning, he missed the 1st rak'ah completely, then he got to the prayer and the Imam, he was in the bowing position, and so then the Imam came up from the bowing position before the follower started his prayer. Then he did not reach the 2nd cycle with the Imam. So in this case, the follower, he would intend Jumu'ah, but he would pray 4 rak'ah. Or if the follower didn't get to the prayer until after the Imam had already stood for i'tidal, or if he was already in the 1st or 2nd prostration, or if he was already in the seating between the 2 prostrations, the sitting between the 2 prostrations, or in the final sitting in which one recites the tashahhud and what comes after it. In these cases, the follower, he would intend the Jumu'ah prayer, but pray 4 cycles of the prayer in fact. He said, it is a condition for the 2 speeches that, a condition for the validity of the 2 speeches, that they be heard by the 40, and that it be prayed in congregation with the 40. The 40 have to hear the integrals of the speeches. They need to hear the necessary aspects of the speeches that the speeches are not valid without. And of course, at least the 40 that fulfill those descriptions that we mentioned. We said, وَفِي الْجُمُعَةِ إِنْ كَانُوا 40 مُكَلَّفِينَ مُسْتَوْطِنِينَ فِي الْأَبْنِيَةِ لَا فِي الْخِيَامِ. So if these 40 people, if they were accountable, meaning sane and pubescent, inhabitants of the town, meaning that that's their hometown, not that they were travelers, and not that they were just residents of a town that didn't intend to stay there, who also lived in buildings, not in tents. So if, or we'll say that it is a must, it is necessary that at least 40 who fulfill this description, these descriptions, pray the Jumu'ah prayer in congregation. 40 fitting those descriptions, hear the integrals of the speeches, and they pray the Friday prayer in congregation. They pray it together. He said, and for another Jumu'ah prayer not to be prayed simultaneously with it, meaning that there would not be another prayer in the same town that started at the exact same time. He said, or before it in the same town. So if there was another Jumu'ah prayer prayed before it, then that latter Jumu'ah prayer would not be valid. But of course, we're going to mention some detail here. He said, Ash-Shafi'i, may Allah accept him, said, even if the town was large. That is the meaning of the saying of Ash-Shafi'i. He said, even if the town was large, meaning that even if the town was large, still the people would pray Jumu'ah in one place, and they're not allowed to have more than one Jumu'ah prayer in one town. The jurists within the school of Ash-Shafi'i, those scholars that are under the level of Ash-Shafi'i but attributed to his school, like the mujtahids of the madhab, those who are qualified to deduce judgments from the sayings of Imam Ash-Shafi'i, not from the Quran and the hadith of the Prophet themselves, but from the sayings of Imam Ash-Shafi'i and interpret his sayings. The jurists within the Shafi'i school said he means if the congregating of the people of the town was not a hardship, meaning that they interpreted the saying of Ash-Shafi'i, which was like a general statement. He said even if the town was large, meaning that even if the town was large, they still have to pray one Jumu'ah prayer, and they're not allowed to have more than one. Those jurists within the Shafi'i school, they said what it actually means, they gave more details, saying it means that if their congregating was not a hardship, if they could congregate without it being a hardship, then it is obligatory for there to be only one Jumu'ah established. If there was more than one, then the former would be valid and the latter would be invalid. However, if it was a hardship for them all to gather in one place, in one location, then it would be permissible to have ta'addud, to have more than one Jumu'ah prayer performed in that town. He said, thus, if one of the two Jumu'ah prayers preceded the other, the first was valid and the latter invalid. Meaning, if it was a situation where it was not a hardship for all the people to congregate in one location, then if two Jumu'ah prayers were prayed, then if one came before the other, then the former would be valid and the latter would be invalid. He said if they were simultaneous, if they both happened at the same time, both are invalidated. Likewise, if the first was unknown, if there was a circumstance where it was unknown which one of the two Jumu'ah prayers was first and which one was latter, which one was second, then if it was a circumstance where it's not a hardship for all the people to congregate in one location, then both of the prayers would still be invalidated because it's unknown which was first and which was second. He said the consideration for precedence, that is the consideration for which Jumu'ah prayer is first and which Jumu'ah prayer is second, and the consideration for simultaneity, meaning that the matter that is considered for the two prayers being at the exact same time is the raw, in the opening saying of Allahu Akbar of the Imam. So, if the Imam of one of the two prayers finished the Ra in Akbar when he said Allahu Akbar to start his prayer, if he finished the Ra before the Imam of another Jumu'ah prayer finished saying the Ra of his opening Takbirah, saying of Allahu Akbar, in a town in which it was not a hardship for all the people to gather in one location, then the prayer of the Imam who finished the Ra of Allahu Akbar first, that Jumu'ah prayer would be valid, and the other Imam, his Jumu'ah prayer would be invalid. Of course, as we mentioned, if it was a hardship for the people of that town to meet in one location, like it's a very large town, and so it became a hardship for them all to meet in one location, then it's permissible to have more than one Jumu'ah, but only enough to meet the need. He said, Ash-Shafi'i, this great Imam, Muhammad ibn Idris Ash-Shafi'i, may Allah accept him, relied on the actions of the people of the first 100 years, because 2 Friday prayers they did not used to hold 2 Friday prayers in one town during that era of the Salaf time. During the first century of the Salaf time, they would only perform 1 Friday prayer in a town. This is among the evidences for the Shafi'i school in this, the actions of the people of the first 100 years in this matter. And with that, the Sheikh finished mentioning the conditions for the Friday prayer. God willing, in the next section, we will talk about the integrals of the 2 speeches, and Allah the Exalted knows best. We ask Allah the Exalted to guide us, to exert much effort in acquiring the knowledge, to master that knowledge by repeating it until it becomes firmly grounded in our hearts, to implement that knowledge and to teach it to others. Surely this is our methodology, the methodology of the people of goodness, knowledge and implementation. Walhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Rabbi ghfirli wa lil mu'minina wal mu'minat. Jazallahu Muhammadan anna khayra. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Muslims around the world are suffering. From China to Kashmir to Syria and Lebanon, and in many other countries.
Even in America, Muslim students struggle to find good schools that are strong in the Islamic knowledge. Help the Association of Islamic Charitable Projects support and strengthen our Muslim communities. Donate generously this Ramadan for the benefit of your Muslim brothers and sisters. Visit gofundme.com/AICP fund.